Today I'm fighting by land, though if you really think about it, I'm fighting with warships that happen to have treads. Welcome to the show, folks. Gregor here. The 9.10 test server for World of Tanks came out quite a while ago, and you all know what that means. The Kaiju! Yes, the Japanese heavy branch. The reputation of these vehicles precedes them, primarily in the fact that they're fucking huge. The Mouse has now been trumped as the biggest heavy tank in the game by the Tier 10 Type 5, which has been dubbed by some, appropriately, as Godzilla. Can we make that stick? I'd like to make that stick. So naturally, a good number of people want to know about these things, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and whether it's actually worth going down this line as far as Tier 10. And as par the course for the test server, no one's really bothering with anything lower than Tier 8 vehicles. But I was surprised to see that the servers weren't exactly spammed with these new arrivals. I think the largest number of Type 5s I ever saw on a team was 4, but their presence was noticeable for obvious reasons. Anyway, the high-tier tanks aren't the only tanks added to the game, obviously, but as I said, due to the nature of the test server, I couldn't really get a hands-on experience with any of the vehicles below Tier 8. Even queuing up in a Tier 8 yielded a rather long wait time, as you can see here. Still, it's worth showing what these great mechanical monsters look like, so starting at Tier 2 and going up one by one, the line begins with the Aigo-Shiro. At Tier 3, the Type 91. Tier 4, the Type 95. You start to see the line's theme fall into play at Tier 5 with the OI experimental model. At Tier 6 is the base OI. Tier 7, the ONI, which has a healthy selection of guns. The Tier 8 OHO, like the French laugh. I'm sorry, you can stop watching now if you want. And at Tier 9 and 10 are the Type 4 and Type 5 heavies, respectively. You can see that they share a great deal of similarities in aesthetics. But you really get the idea of how these vehicles play just by looking at them. They're massive, for one. So heavy that even the Tier 5 and onward, these tanks are capable of equipping a super heavy spall liner. That's how freaking heavy these vehicles are. I'm going to talk a little bit about the spall liner later. But the basic idea is loads and loads of front armor, hull and turret, angled very well, powerful guns to boot. And one of the things that I like about this line of tanks is that this theme, this optimal style of play, relatively remains the same over the course of your progression. The basic principle in playing the Tier 8 OHO isn't going to be that much different than playing the Tier 7 ONI. Now, I feel that the biggest transition, if you could call it that, would be the Tier 8 to Tier 9 transition. As you can see here, visually speaking, the vehicles look very different from each other, but then you get to Tier 10, and the Type 5 Heavy is essentially an up-armored Type 4. So you don't have to change the way you play these vehicles very often if you decide to grind down this line. So to give you an idea of how some of these vehicles perform, I'm going to show you some replays from my experiences on the test server and talk about some of the things I noticed that I think are worth mentioning. So here I am getting ready to go in the Type 5 Heavy Tier 10 Japanese tank, and right away you can see just how fucking enormous this vehicle is. That's a Mouse right next to me, and obviously the Mouse has a reputation of just being a gargantuan machine. But this thing is actually larger than the Mouse. Now, is all that size actually... does the size of this vehicle actually translate into something effective? Is the front armor on this thing actually effective, or is it just a big arty magnet? Well, it definitely is it's definitely an arty magnet, but this tank's got a lot of front armor. Put a couple of things into context here as you're watching. There's an easily one-shottable tank right there. I move in and try to get the kill shot. Somebody else cleans it up. But now, I'm hella overexposed, and oh dear, something bad is gonna happen here. Oh no! That's the tank destroyer. Oh man, what do? I guess I gotta wiggle this thing. I gotta keep my weak spots from getting hit to the best of my ability. And... wow. Are you serious? That was a Waffenträger E100, obviously. And no exaggeration here, alright? You can see for yourself. This tank can bounce an entire clip from a Waffenträger E100 if you just keep your weak spots as difficult to hit as possible. And this tank does have weak spots that can be penetrated from the right angle, but still, my goodness. I would never have assumed that this vehicle could pull off a feat like that. And this is, mind you, this is on the test server, where there's a very, very high chance that that guy was flinging gold. I know that I'm not firing gold in any of these clips here. Maybe in a couple of instances I load my ammunition on the test server just as I do on the live server, because I want to get an idea of how the gun handles the way I would be using it in actuality. But my god, this is the theme with these vehicles. If you can take away anything from this video, just note that the front armor of these things is as good as you would think. Okay? There are a couple of exceptions, as always, but just, god damn. Here's another clip. Here I am on Kharkov, I'm in a corridor, and there's 3 enemy artillery pieces on the team. What the hell do you think is gonna happen? Oh, wow, I couldn't have predicted. Oh, man. Now, keep in mind, I have a super heavy spall liner equipped on this vehicle in order to mitigate the effects of artillery. But I can't imagine the amount of damage that thing could have done. Because it did take up a pretty good portion of my health there, and I do have a lot of armor that can absorb the splash damage of artillery shots, because that didn't penetrate my armor from the top. It wasn't an AP round, it was an HE round that managed to take out my tracks and deal splash damage. So you have to keep in mind when you queue up in these things, you have to be very conscientious. See, there we go again. You have to be really, really conscientious of the enemy team's composition, and you have to adjust to that, and that's something that you have to do in any kind of tank. But it's not exactly a jack-of-all-trades vehicle, right? So you have to focus on that even more so. Now, instead of assisting my team over here in the center of the map, I decide, you know, I'm really low. I'm in a position where I can actually hunt some of this already. Let's see how this goes. And... or not. Yeah. Bye-bye. Notice that? I got shotgunned by that guy in the T-92 from the side. Now, he was firing HE there. Did a lot of damage to my treads, but this tank has very, very thick tracks, and they can absorb damage in that way. So it's a it's a pretty decent side scraper as well, and as big of an arty target as it is, it can take a surprising amount of damage from artillery. But of course, none of that really means anything if you can't deal any damage back, right? Otherwise, these vehicles are just hulking masses of metal that take up space on the map. Well, here I am queued up in a tier 8 Oho, and you'll notice that I actually have HE loaded. Why? Because this vehicle can equip a 150mm howitzer. And I'm taking some shots over there in the distance. And this is pretty favorable matchmaking, I would say. Considering that I queued up in tier 8 to begin with, and I actually got into a match without a tier 9 or a tier 10 tank. So this actually was really helpful because it gave me an idea of how this vehicle would probably function if it was at the top of the food chain. I did a fair amount of damage to that tank in the distance there, that Tiger. Obviously a really long reload for a howitzer. And this isn't really the top gun, but I experimented with it just to get an idea. Still bouncing some shots. Just a really, really hard... These tanks are just tough nuts to crack. Unless you get them in the side or the rear. And even then, the side armor... Excuse me, the rear armor is usually stronger than the side armor, even. That's not to say that the rear armor is much at all, but... Still. Ping, ping, ping. All tier 8 tanks. And only 5100. Another tank. In any other heavy tank in the game, I'd be looking at 5100 and thinking, uh-oh, I need to get into a position here where I can bounce him. And I'm just out here in the open. I'm like, I don't care. So I try to get into the thick of the fight here, and I see that a couple of these tanks here are French, and of course, being French, they don't have much armor. And I load up an AP round from this 150mm howitzer, and I don't want to miss this shot. Aim. Damn it. Alright, fine, fine, fine. Let's wait a little bit longer. Wasn't able to pen from the front there. Let's load HE. Hit him from the back and pen him from the back. Something like that. Come on. How do you think this is going to go? We'll wiggle a little bit, and then he turns around. Bad decision. What did you think was going to happen, dummy? Okay. What's this? Lunch. Nom 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 nom. Now, here is something that you will notice. Especially on the tier 8 Oho and on the tier 7 Oni. These guns... I'm sorry, these tanks have secondary guns that aren't functioning, that exist on the front of the tank. And they kind of get in the way. The gun depression on these vehicles, particularly this vehicle, is not very good. It gets better on the tier 9 and the tier 10. But for any of these vehicles that have this sort of configuration here, it's not very pleasant.
I'm sorry.
But these vehicles aren't immune to damage from the front. And you're about to see why. The one thing that you definitely need to be on the lookout for are tank destroyers of any kind, because of their high pen, especially their premium rounds. And I know that someone's going to say, but you demonstrated earlier that it was capable of bouncing an entire clip from a waffle. Yes, but that was at long range. And, of course, penetration drop-off at range affected that situation greatly. Not so much for a tank like the T110E3, up as close as he is. And I'm blocking the weak spots that do exist on this vehicle. The cupola and a couple of the more flat armor spots at this angle. And, well, I was a little bit irritated by that. But it comes to show. You do need to be careful with the sort of, like, assault gun type tank destroyers in towns like this. So what can I summarize about the Japanese heavies? Well, they're certainly rather quirky vehicles, one-trick ponies even. They're not exactly versatile heavy tanks in the sense that they can brawl and flex when needed. That's why vehicles like the E100, the IS-3, M6, and others are popular in competitive play right now. But I don't think that should detract any value from these vehicles. In the right spot, they are quite capable of holding their own. Getting them into a hold-down spot would be an understandably good situation to be in because, as you saw, even out in the open at range, these vehicles are just freaking tough. However, penetration values for their guns can be somewhat lacking, and the only way to alleviate that is to get in closer, which makes it easier for tanks to hit your weak spots. What do these vehicles excel at then? What's their niche? At top tier especially, I can see most of the Japanese heavies being really good bully tanks. With their flanks protected, they chew up less armored tanks for breakfast, and they're surprisingly capable of brawling with other heavy tanks as well. Their speed, however, is something to keep in mind, and while driving them, you'll have to pick the path of least resistance to potentially see anything out of them. Otherwise, you're just going to be cleaning up scraps. Their size makes them particularly prone to attacks from artillery, but the high amount of armor they do get mitigates some of the effects of HE shells. AP is a whole different story though, so you still want to avoid clumping up with large groups, and find protection from artillery when you can. I also highly recommend equipping a spall liner to mitigate the effects of the artillery shots. These vehicles are big, loud, and boisterous. They may take a while to get into battle, but when they do arrive, they make their presence very well known. Beware of artillery and tank destroyers, but other than that, I found these vehicles very fun to play, and while I don't know if I necessarily bring them into a Clan Wars match, they're powerful vehicles when used right. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe for more World of Tanks content like this. My name's Gregory Havener. Thanks for watching.